Mr. James Carter was a man of ambition. As the owner of Carter Enterprises, his reputation as a brilliant businessman was unmatched. However, behind closed doors, James wrestled with a nagging doubt. Did his employees respect him, or was he just another boss in their eyes? One evening, during a meeting with his closest confidant, his assistant Mike, James shared an unusual idea. "I want to know what my employees really think about me," James said. "Not as their boss, but as someone they don't fear or admire." Mike, though skeptical, listened intently. James devised a plan. He would take a leave of absence, pretending to travel abroad. Instead, he would disguise himself as Tom, a struggling janitor. This would allow him to observe his company from the ground up. Mike reluctantly agreed to cover for him. The next morning, James put on tattered clothes, smudged his face with dirt, and reported for duty as Tom. With a mop in hand and determination in his heart, he prepared to walk into his company, not as a CO but as an ordinary worker. Tom's arrival was uneventful. No one noticed the new janitor entering the building. The security guard glanced at him briefly but waved him through without interest. The polished floors and buzzing conversations of the corporate offices felt oddly different from this new perspective. Tom reported to the maintenance manager, Mr. Riley, a gruff man who didn't bother with pleasantries. "You're late," Riley snapped, even though Tom had arrived 10 minutes early. "Grab that mop and get to work." As Tom pushed the mop through the hallways, he passed by familiar faces. Employees he had seen countless times, as James didn't even glance at him now. It stung, but he reminded himself that this was part of the plan. The day ended with aching arms and a new perspective. James realized how invisible janitors were. No one thanked him for cleaning or noticed his effort. It was an eye-opening start to his journey. The days blurred together as Tom settled into his role. The physical labor was more exhausting than he had anticipated, and the pay was shockingly low compared to the lifestyle he was accustomed to. But the most surprising part was how easily people ignored him. Employees who once smiled at him as their boss walked past him without acknowledgement. Even during lunch breaks, no one invited him to sit with them. He sat alone, watching as coworkers laughed and chatted, oblivious to his presence. One day, as he mopped near the reception desk, the receptionist, Lily, greeted him with a warm smile. "Good morning," she said cheerfully. James was taken aback. Lily was the first person to acknowledge him in days. "Good morning," he replied, grateful for her kindness. Despite her smile, Lily seemed stressed. Her phone rang incessantly and her to-do list was overflowing. James wondered why such a hardworking employee seemed so burdened. By the end of his first week, Tom had learned more about his employees than he ever had as their boss. The cafeteria, once a place for James to grab a quick coffee, became a window into his employees' lives. Sitting alone, Tom overheard conversations he would never have been privy to as the CEO. "The company keeps cutting bonuses," one man complained. "They expect us to work overtime, but there's no appreciation. They only care about profits," another agreed. "The CEO probably doesn't even know we exist." James felt a pang of guilt. He had always believed he was a fair employer, but these comments made him question his leadership. Was he really so out of touch? The break room was quiet when James, disguised as Tom, noticed Lily sitting at her desk. She had her head in her hands and her face looked pale and tired. Concerned, he walked over, pretending to clean nearby. "Are you okay?" he asked hesitantly. Lily straightened up, startled. "Oh, I'm fine," she said with a forced smile. But her empty lunchbox and rumbling stomach told a different story. James hesitated before pulling out the sandwich he had packed for himself. "It's not much, but if you're hungry you can have half." Lily's face flushed with embarrassment. "I can't take your food, Tom. You probably need it more than I do." "Please," James insisted, splitting the sandwich in two. "I've got enough. You need your energy more than I do." Reluctantly, Lily accepted. She took a small bite and sighed. "Thank you, Tom. You didn't have to do this." "It's nothing," James replied, though her gratitude made him feel lighter. For the rest of the day he couldn't stop thinking about how someone so kind and hardworking was struggling to afford something as basic as lunch. One evening, as James cleaned a conference room, he heard voices from down the hall. Quietly he moved closer to eavesdrop. "I can't believe they cut our bonuses again," a woman said bitterly. "They say it's for the company's growth," another voice chimed in. Meanwhile, Carter's probably lounging on a yacht somewhere. James froze. The conversation stung, but he couldn't blame them. What do you expect? Someone else added. He doesn't care about us. To him we're replaceable. Their words echoed in his mind as he continued mopping. He had always believed he was a fair and approachable boss, but hearing his employees speak so openly about their frustrations made him question everything. That night, as he sat in his small rented apartment, James replayed the conversation in his head. Was this how all his employees saw him? It was past 8 p.m. when James noticed Emma, a junior employee, still at her desk. She was surrounded by piles of papers, her face red and tear-streaked. Hey, everything okay? He asked cautiously. Emma sniffled and looked up. It's this project. It's due tomorrow and I just can't get it right. If I mess this up, I'm done. James hesitated. Mind if I take a look? Emma raised an eyebrow but slid the papers over. Sure, but I don't think a janitor can help with this. James scanned the documents. They were poorly organized and the presentation lacked clarity. With a few quick suggestions, he showed Emma how to simplify the layout and refine her ideas. Emma stared at him in amazement. How do you know all this? Let's just say I've been around, James replied with a smile. Tom, you're a lifesaver, Emma said, her mood visibly lifting. You should be in management. James chuckled at the irony but felt a surge of pride. For the first time he saw the impact he could have, even in disguise. James was mopping the hallway near the break room when he encountered a group of employees gathered around a table, chatting loudly. As they got up to leave, they left their trash, empty coffee cups, wrappers and crumbs, scattered across the table. Excuse me, James said politely. Could you please throw your trash away? The group turned to him and one of them sneered. Isn't that your job? Another laughed. Yeah, that's why you're here, right? James clenched his jaw but forced a smile. It only takes a second to clean up after yourselves. Relax, janitor, one of them said mockingly. We're giving you job security. The group laughed and walked away, leaving James to clean up the mess. As he picked up the trash, his frustration simmered. These employees had no idea who he really was, but their disrespect was undeniable. The incident stayed with him. It was a stark reminder of how some people viewed those in lower-paying jobs. James volunteered for the night shift, hoping to learn more about the people who kept his company running after hours. It was during one of these shifts that he met Carlos, the security guard. Carlos greeted him with a friendly nod as he walked his rounds. Quiet night, he remarked. Seems like it, James replied. How long have you been working here? 5 years, Carlos said. It's not easy, but it pays the bills, barely. As they talked, James learned that Carlos worked 2 jobs to support his wife and 2 young children. I hardly see my kids, Carlos admitted. But I'm doing my best to give them a better life. James was struck by Carlos's dedication. Despite his struggles, the man remained optimistic and hardworking. It was humbling to see how much his employees sacrificed for their families. By the end of the night, James had a newfound respect for the people who worked behind the scenes. Their stories fueled his desire to make meaningful changes. James decided to test his employees' integrity. During a lunch break, he left a wallet filled with cash on a table in the break room. Then he watched from a distance as employees came and went. After a while, Lily entered the room. She noticed the wallet and looked around, confused. Picking it up, she opened it to check for identification. Whose wallet is this? She asked aloud. When no one responded, she walked straight to HR to hand it in. James watched the scene unfold, feeling a mix of relief and admiration. Despite her financial struggles, Lily's honesty was unwavering. Later, he approached her and casually asked, "Did you find anything interesting today?" Lily smiled. "Just someone's wallet. I hope HR can find the owner." James nodded, impressed. Her actions reaffirmed his belief that good people often go unnoticed. It was a small moment, but it filled him with hope. The next morning, James was mopping near the office lounge when Emma approached him with a radiant smile, holding a steaming cup of coffee. "Tom, you wouldn't believe it. My presentation yesterday was a huge hit. My manager said it was the best proposal they've seen all year." James smiled warmly. "I'm glad it worked out. You deserve the recognition." Emma hesitated, her expression turning thoughtful. "Honestly, I don't know how I would have managed without your help. You're too smart to be doing janitorial work. Why are you here anyway?" James chuckled nervously. Sometimes life takes unexpected turns. Her curious gaze lingered, but she didn't press further. Instead, she handed him the coffee. "This is for you. Consider it a thank you." As she walked away, James felt a strange mix of pride and guilt. Emma had no idea who he really was, but her gratitude reaffirmed his belief that kindness and mentorship could make a difference. Later that afternoon, James was summoned to Mr. Riley's office. The maintenance manager scowled at him from behind a desk piled high with paperwork. "Tom," Riley began, his tone sharp, "I've been hearing that you're spending too much time chatting with staff. That's not your job." James raised an eyebrow. "I was just trying to help out where I could." "Well, don't," Riley snapped. "You're a janitor, not a consultant. Stick to your duties or you'll be looking for a new job." James clenched his jaw but forced himself to remain calm. He nodded and left the office, his fists balled at his sides. Riley's words weren't just rude. They were emblematic of the toxic culture festering within his company. As he returned to work, James resolved to make a note of Riley's behavior. When the time came, he would address it. On his night shift, James immediately noticed Carlos's absence at the security desk. Curious, he asked Mark, the guard covering for Carlos, what had happened. "Carlos took the night off to see his daughter's school play," Mark said with a grin. "It's the first time he's taken a day off in months." James smiled, picturing Carlos in the audience, cheering on his daughter. He imagined the joy it must bring her to see her father there, despite his grueling schedule. "That's great," James said. "He deserves it." The thought of Carlos's sacrifice stayed with him throughout the shift. James realized that many of his employees worked tirelessly to support their families, often at great personal cost. These were the people keeping the company running, and it was time they were acknowledged. During a break, Lily approached James with a small, steaming cup of coffee. "You've been working so hard lately," she said, smiling warmly. "This is on me." James blinked in surprise. "Lily, you didn't have to do this." "It's nothing," she said, brushing off his protest. "You're one of the only people here who actually notices others. That's rare." James took the coffee, his throat tightening with emotion. He had come into this undercover role expecting to be ignored or dismissed, but Lily's kindness was a reminder that compassion existed, even in the most challenging environments. "You're a good person, Lily," he said quietly. She laughed lightly. "Coming from you, that means a lot." James was scrubbing the floors near the break room when Riley stormed in, his face flushed with anger. "What is this?" Riley barked, pointing to a mop leaning against the wall. "I've told you 100 times to clean up after yourself." James glanced at the mop, realizing it wasn't his. "That's not mine, sir," he said evenly. "Don't argue with me." Riley snapped. "I'm this close to firing you, Tom. Do your job right or get out." James bit the inside of his cheek, his temper threatening to boil over. He wanted to reveal his true identity and put Riley in his place, but he knew it wasn't the right time. As Riley stomped off, James made a silent promise to himself. Riley's reign of bullying would soon come to an end. That night, James sat in his tiny rented apartment, staring at the ceiling. His body ached from hours of physical labor, but his mind refused to rest. He thought about Lily's kindness, Emma's gratitude, and Carlos's sacrifices. These people were the heart of his company, yet they went unrecognized and undervalued. Then there was Riley, a manager who belittled his subordinates and fostered a culture of fear. How many other Rileys were out there, quietly eroding the morale of his workforce? James realized that the changes his company needed weren't just about policies or paychecks. It was about rebuilding a culture of respect, empathy, and teamwork. "I've been blind for too long," he murmured. "But that ends now." One evening, James was cleaning an executive office when he ran into Mr. Harris, a senior manager. Harris glanced at him with mild disdain. "Still here, janitor?" Harris said with a smirk. "Yes, sir," James replied evenly. "You should be grateful you have a job," Harris said, his tone dripping with arrogance. "People like you don't get many opportunities." James clenched his jaw but managed a polite nod. Harris's condescension was infuriating, but it was also enlightening. People like Harris represented the very attitude James was determined to root out. Emma couldn't shake her curiosity about Tom. The janitor was far too intelligent and insightful to be working such a menial job. One afternoon she approached him in the break room. "Tom, can I ask you something?" James glanced up from his coffee. "Sure. You seem to know a lot about things most janitors wouldn't," she said carefully. How did you end up here? James smiled faintly. Let's just say life took an unexpected turn. Emma's brow furrowed, but she didn't press further. Instead, she decided to keep a closer eye on him. Riley's treatment of James worsened with each passing day. He constantly criticized James's work and found reasons to belittle him in front of others. One afternoon, Riley stormed into the supply closet where James was organizing cleaning products. I've had it with your attitude, Tom, Riley snapped. You think you're too good for this job? You're lucky I haven't fired you yet. James met his gaze calmly. I'm just trying to do my job, sir. Riley sneered. Do it better or you'll be out of here. As Riley left, James took a deep breath. He knew Riley's behavior stemmed from insecurity and power trips, but it was unacceptable. Change was coming, Riley just didn't know it yet. It was late at night when James noticed unusual activity in the accounts department. A small group of employees was gathered around a computer, speaking in hushed tones. Curious, he lingered nearby, pretending to clean. We need to adjust these numbers, one whispered urgently. If this gets flagged, we're in trouble. Keep it quiet, another replied. No one needs to know. James's heart pounded. Was this evidence of embezzlement? The implications were staggering. If true, it could undermine the entire company's integrity. Determined to uncover the truth, James decided to investigate further, knowing this discovery could change everything. James stayed late one night, determined to uncover more about the accounts department's suspicious activities. He watched from a distance as a group of employees gathered around a computer, speaking in hushed tones. They'll never catch on, one of them whispered. They won't if we're careful, another replied. Once the group left, James slipped into the room. His heart raced as he opened a ledger left carelessly on the desk. The numbers didn't add up. Unauthorized transfers, inflated invoices, and suspicious entries were glaringly obvious. James snapped photos of the evidence with his phone. The weight of the discovery hit him hard. The company was being exploited from within. He now had to figure out how far the corruption extended, and who was at the top of this scheme. Emma watched Tom closely over the next few days. Something about him didn't add up. His insights during casual conversations, the way he carried himself. It was as if he were more than a janitor. Tom, can I ask you something? Emma finally said during a quiet moment in the break room. Sure, James replied, knowing this conversation was inevitable. You seem to know so much, about work, about people. Why are you here cleaning floors? James gave her a faint smile. Let's just say I've had a complicated journey. Emma leaned closer, her curiosity piqued. I think you're hiding something. But for some reason I trust you. James appreciated her honesty but knew he couldn't reveal the truth just yet. You'll understand soon enough, he said cryptically, leaving her even more curious. One afternoon, James overheard two employees from the accounts department whispering in the cafeteria. I'm telling you, we need to be more careful, one said, his voice low but urgent. Relax, the other replied. No one notices us. We're the last people they'd suspect. James continued mopping nearby, pretending not to hear. He made a mental note of their names. It was clear they were part of the scheme, but the question remained. Who was pulling the strings? During a break, Lily approached James, her face pale and troubled. Tom, can I talk to you? Of course, James said, setting his mop aside. Lily hesitated, then sighed. Sometimes I feel like quitting. The stress, the low pay, the constant pressure. It's overwhelming. James frowned. You shouldn't have to feel this way. You're one of the hardest working people here. Lily smiled faintly. That's kind of you to say, but it doesn't change much. People like me don't have a lot of options. Her words hit James hard. He realized how many employees like Lily were struggling under the weight of systemic issues. It strengthened his resolve to make real changes. James continued monitoring the accounts department, piecing together the web of deceit. One night he saw Mr. Harris, the arrogant senior manager, entering the room long after hours. Harris unlocked a drawer, pulled out a ledger, and began typing furiously on the computer. James watched from a shadowed corner, careful not to be seen. When Harris left, James entered the room and checked the ledger. The transactions pointed directly to Harris as the orchestrator of the embezzlement scheme. James now had the final piece of the puzzle. It was time to take action. The next day, Riley cornered James in the hallway, barking orders and criticizing his work. "You're the laziest worker I've ever seen," Riley shouted, his voice echoing through the corridor. Before James could respond, Lily and Emma stepped in. "That's enough," Lily said, her voice shaking with anger. "Tom works harder than anyone here." Emma nodded. "If anyone needs to shape up, it's you, Riley. All you do is bully people." Other employees began murmuring in agreement. Riley looked around, his authority crumbling. James stayed silent but couldn't help feeling proud of the courage his coworkers were showing. That evening, James confronted Harris in the parking lot. "I know what you've been doing," James said, his voice calm but firm. Harris smirked. "And what would a janitor know about anything?" James stepped closer. "I've seen the ledgers. I've heard your employees talking. You're embezzling funds and I have proof." Harris's smirk faltered. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." James leaned in. "Neither do you." Harris stormed off, visibly shaken. James knew it was only a matter of time before everything unraveled. The following Monday, James walked into the office dressed sharply in his usual suit. The employees stared, their mouths agape. James called a company-wide meeting. Standing at the front of the room, he addressed the crowd. "For the past month, I've been working here undercover as Tom, the janitor," he began. Gasps echoed through the room. "I wanted to see this company from the ground up. What I discovered shocked me," James continued. "I saw both the best and the worst of our workplace." He outlined the embezzlement scheme, the toxic management, and the financial struggles of employees like Lily and Carlos. James turned to Harris, who sat frozen in the audience. "Mr. Harris, you've been stealing from this company and betraying the trust of your co-workers. I have the evidence to prove it." Security guards escorted Harris out as employees murmured in shock. James then addressed Riley. "As for you, Mr. Riley, your treatment of employees is unacceptable. Effective immediately, you are terminated." Riley stammered, but James's decision was final. The room erupted in applause as employees realized their toxic superiors were finally being held accountable. With Harris and Riley gone, James introduced sweeping changes to the company. Salaries were increased, management underwent mandatory training, and a new employee appreciation program was implemented. Lily was promoted to a leadership role, Emma was recognized for her exceptional talent, and Carlos was given a flexible schedule so he could spend more time with his family. Standing in the bustling office, James reflected on his journey. He had seen the best and worst of his company, but now it was on a path to becoming a place where everyone felt valued. The employees looked at him with a newfound respect, not just as their boss but as a leader who truly cared.